Welcome to Miss Scarlett. Subscribe and don't miss out on Patreon. Have fun! In the solitude of a temporary sanctuary, Private Luke Hendricks found a rare moment of liberty. The confines of military routine had loosened their grip, offering him a much-needed reprieve. The off-base apartment, generously lent by a deployed friend, became a personal haven. As he sat on the bathroom floor, a unique ritual unfolded. With the soft breeze from the portable fan brushing against his skin, Luke delicately twisted the lid of the nail polish, unveiling a vibrant, ruby hue. Its iridescent promise captivated his gaze, arousing a sense of excitement that had long been stifled. He'd purchased it at a drugstore 3 towns over, paying cash, making sure no one who might recognize him was around. With careful, deliberate strokes, he painted each nail, admiring how the color transformed his hands. His movements were precise, practiced over many months of secret application and hasty removal. The dark brown hair that fell into his eyes needed a trim to meet military regulations, but in these private moments, he liked how it softened his features.
"Just a little longer,"
he whispered to himself. One day, he wouldn't have to hide anymore. One day, the person in the mirror would match the person he knew himself to be. The deep crimson polish dried as he flipped through a magazine, careful not to smudge his handiwork. Outside, rain began to fall, streaking the windows and creating a cozy atmosphere that made Luke wish he could stay in this bubble forever, wearing the soft gray lounge pants and oversized cream sweater he'd hidden at the bottom of his weekend bag. But Sunday evening approached too quickly, as it always did. The shimmering ruby nails had been a risk, a bigger one than usual. Normally, Luke stuck to clear polish or the palest pink when indulging his secret, something he could quickly remove before heading back to base. But this weekend had felt different, special somehow. A small act of courage, of self-affirmation. He packed his things slowly, reluctant to return to the role he played every day. The weight of the uniform hanging in the closet seemed heavier than usual. His phone buzzed with a text from his bunkmate. "Highway traffic bad. Leave early." Luke glanced at the time and swore. If the traffic was already backing up, he needed to leave now to make curfew. Hastily, he tossed the remainder of his belongings into his duffel bag, forgetting entirely about the ruby nails in his rush. The drive back was a nightmare. Construction had reduced the highway to 1 lane, and rain continued to pour, reducing visibility. By the time Luke pulled into the base parking lot, it was nearly midnight. He hurried through the security checkpoint, flashing his ID card, and jogged to the barracks with his collar turned up against the rain. Sleep came quickly, the exhaustion of the drive overwhelming him. The next morning, the barracks erupted with activity earlier than usual. "Surprise inspection! On your feet now!" Staff Sergeant Miller's voice boomed through the hallway. Luke's eyes flew open. Monday. Inspection. His heart hammered in his chest as the events from the previous day rushed back. In an instant he remembered. The polish. The bright, unmistakable ruby polish still adorning his fingernails.
"Fall in! 5 minutes."
The sergeant's voice grew closer. Frantically, Luke tore through his footlocker looking for polish remover. Knowing it was futile, he'd never risk keeping it on base. He tried scraping the polish with his teeth, succeeding only in chipping a corner of 1 nail, the bright color still glaringly obvious. His hands shook as he pulled on his uniform. Could he claim injury? Wear gloves? Both would raise more questions than they'd answer. The formation assembled quickly, soldiers standing at rigid attention as Staff Sergeant Vivian Miller began her inspection. Known for her exacting standards and sharp eye, Miller had earned both the respect and fear of the unit. Nothing escaped her notice. Not a stray thread, not a smudge on a boot, and certainly not bright red fingernails on one of her soldiers. Luke kept his hands balled into fists at his sides, forcing himself to breathe evenly as the sergeant moved down the line. His palms were slick with sweat, heart pounding so loudly he was certain everyone could hear it.
Hendricks.
The sergeant stopped in front of him.
Your uniform looks satisfactory.
Luke swallowed hard.
Thank you, Staff Sergeant. Salute,
she ordered, a standard part of every inspection. His stomach dropped. There was no way to salute without showing his hand. For a moment, he considered refusing. The punishment for insubordination might be preferable to what would happen when she saw his nails. But years of discipline took over. His arm rose in a crisp salute, the morning light catching the ruby polish, making it shine like a beacon. Miller's eyes narrowed, focusing immediately on his hand. Her expression remained impassive, but Luke could feel the weight of her gaze. The moment stretched, seeming to last forever, before she returned the salute and moved on without comment. Relief flooded through him, though he knew it was temporary. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The inspection continued, Miller examining each soldier with the same intensity. When she reached the end of the line, she dismissed the unit, except for Luke. Private Hendricks, remain behind. The other soldiers filed out, a few casting curious glances his way. Luke stood at attention, sweat trickling down his back, despite the cool morning air. His olive-green uniform felt suddenly too tight, constraining. When they were alone, Miller stepped in front of him again. At ease, Private. Luke adjusted his stance, placing his hands behind his back in a futile attempt to hide them. Bring your hands forward, soldier, Miller ordered, her voice giving away nothing. Slowly, Luke complied, revealing his ruby-red nails. In the bright morning light, they seemed even more vivid than before, a stark contrast against his tan skin and the military green of his uniform. Miller studied his hands for a long moment. Follow me to my office. The walk across the base was the longest of Luke's life. Each step felt like moving through molasses, his mind racing with the potential consequences. Would this be a dishonorable discharge? Article 15? Would everyone find out? Miller's office was sparse but personal. A few photographs on the desk, service medals, and commendations on the wall, an ancient coffee maker in the corner. She closed the door behind them. Sit down, Hendricks. He perched on the edge of the chair, back straight, eyes forward. Miller took her seat behind the desk, folding her hands in front of her.
I'm going to ask you something, and I want an honest answer.
Those nails, is this a one-time thing, or is there something more going on? The question hung in the air. Luke's throat felt dry, his pulse racing. This was the moment, a crossroads he'd known would come eventually, though not like this. Not caught, unprepared, vulnerable.
It's not just the nails, Staff Sergeant.
His voice came out barely above a whisper. Miller nodded, her expression softening almost imperceptibly. I thought as much. She reached into her desk drawer and removed a small framed photograph, turning it to face Luke. The picture showed a much younger version of Miller, but with longer hair, softer features, wearing civilian clothes. That was me, 15 years ago, she said quietly. before I transitioned. Luke stared at the photograph, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. Staff Sergeant Miller, the tough-as-nails, by-the-book leader who commanded respect throughout the base, was transgender? Luke searched for words. I didn't know. Most don't. It's not something I broadcast, but it's not something I hide either. She put the photograph back in the drawer. The military has changed a lot since I joined. It's not perfect, but there are protocols in place now, resources available. Luke's eyes burned with unshed tears. I've been struggling with this for a long time, he admitted.
Since before I enlisted. I thought the structure, the discipline might fix me somehow. There's nothing to fix, Hendricks. You are who you are.
Miller's voice was firm, but kind.
But there are proper channels for addressing this. Showing up to inspection with painted nails isn't one of them. I forgot to remove them, Luke explained. I was in a rush getting back from weekend leave, and this morning... Miller held up a hand. I understand, but appearances and standards still matter in the military. If you're serious about transitioning, there are medical officers and counselors you should speak with. What will happen to me? The question had been hovering at the edge of Luke's consciousness since the moment Miller had noticed his nails. That depends on you.
Miller leaned forward.
If you want to continue serving, I can help guide you through the process. It won't be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever is. But you won't have to face it alone.
For the first time in years, Luke felt a weight lifting. The possibility of living authentically, even within the structured confines of military life, seemed suddenly, startlingly real.
I'd like that,
Luke said, his voice steadier now. I want to continue serving, and I think I'd like to be called Julia. That's the name I've always thought of for myself.
Miller nodded. Julia it is then. First things first, though. Those nails need to come off before you report for duty. I'll give you 20 minutes to take care of it. After that, we'll schedule you an appointment with Captain Reynolds in medical. She's good people. She helped me through my own transition.
Thank you, Staff Sergeant. The words seemed inadequate for the lifeline Miller had just thrown her.
Don't thank me yet. The road ahead won't be smooth. There will be paperwork, medical evaluations. And yes, some people will make it harder than it needs to be. But I've found that being true to yourself makes you a better soldier, not a worse one.
As Julia left Miller's office, her steps felt lighter despite the challenges ahead. The barracks looked the same, the sounds of military life unchanged, but something fundamental had shifted. For the first time, the future held more promise than fear. In the bathroom, as she scrubbed the ruby polish from her nails, Julia looked at her reflection. The same brown hair, the same features gazed back at her, but now acknowledged, recognized, the beginning of becoming visible. The appointment with Captain Reynolds the following day was both terrifying and affirming. The medical officer listened without judgment as Julia explained her feelings, asking questions that were probing but respectful.
The process takes time,
Reynolds explained, reviewing a checklist of medical and psychological evaluations that would be required.
And while regulations have improved, the military still has specific standards that need to be met before official recognition of transition can occur.
I understand. Julia nodded, overwhelmed but determined. I'm ready to do whatever's necessary. Good, because it will be necessary to be patient. Reynolds smiled kindly. However, there are steps we can begin right away. I can refer you to a military therapist who specializes in gender identity issues, and we can discuss medical options once those initial consultations are complete. The next months passed in a blur of appointments, evaluations, and paperwork. Julia continued her regular duties, the everyday routine of military life, providing a stabilizing counterpoint to the profound changes taking place in her personal journey. Staff Sergeant Miller proved to be an invaluable mentor, offering guidance on navigating both the bureaucratic maze and the social complexities of transitioning while in uniform.
Small steps,
Miller advised during one of their regular check-ins. Don't try to rush everything at once. The system moves at its own pace, and pushing too hard can backfire. Julia took the advice to heart, focusing on each step as it came. The therapy sessions helped her articulate feelings she'd suppressed for years. The medical evaluations confirmed what she'd always known about herself, and slowly, her exterior began to align with her interior truth. Hormone therapy started 6 months after that fateful inspection day. The changes were subtle at first: skin softening, body fat redistributing, emotions surfacing in new ways. Julia documented each change in a journal, marveling at the gradual transformation. Her brown hair, once kept military short, she allowed to grow as much as regulations permitted. Even within the constraints of military grooming standards, the slightly longer style framed her face differently, highlighting cheekbones that seemed more prominent as the hormones did their work. Not everyone was supportive. Some former friends grew distant. Certain commanding officers seemed to find more fault with her work than before. There were whispers, sidelong glances, the occasional deliberate use of her former name or male pronouns. But there were surprises too. Comrades who stood by her, officers who ensured regulations regarding her treatment were strictly enforced, new friends who saw her for who she truly was. 1 year after the nail polish incident, Julia stood before her bathroom mirror in her off-base apartment, preparing for an important day. Her official documentation had finally been updated. Today, she would report for duty as Private Julia Hendricks for the first time. Her uniform, now tailored to her changing body, hung pressed and ready. She applied a light touch of makeup, conforming to military regulations for female personnel. Natural, understated, but unmistakably feminine. A knock at her door interrupted her preparations. "It's open," she called, expecting her neighbor who had promised to drive her to base. Instead, Staff Sergeant Miller stood in the doorway in full dress uniform. "Sergeant?" Julia straightened, surprised. "Is everything okay?"
"More than okay, Hendricks."
Miller smiled, a rare sight.
"I thought your first official day as Julia deserved a proper escort."
The gesture brought unexpected tears to Julia's eyes.
"Thank you. That means everything." "Save the emotions for after duty,"
Miller said, but her expression remained warm.
"You've earned this day. Be proud of it."
The drive to base was quiet, both women lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the main gate, Julia felt a flutter of anxiety. "Everyone will be watching," she murmured.
"Yes,"
Miller agreed.
"Some out of curiosity, some out of support, some looking for you to fail. The only way forward is with your head held high."
And that's exactly how Julia walked onto the base that morning. Head high, shoulders back, every inch the soldier she had trained to be. The familiar weight of her uniform, the rhythmic sound of boots on pavement, the crisp morning air, all unchanged, yet experienced now through a new lens. The day passed in a series of ordinary duties, performed under extraordinary circumstances. Each interaction, each acknowledgement of Private Hendricks or Ma'am instead of Sir felt like a small victory. There were awkward moments. A colleague stumbling over pronouns, a form with a hastily corrected gender marker, a bathroom situation that required diplomatic navigation. But by day's end, Julia felt a profound sense of accomplishment. Not just for surviving the day, but for living it authentically. That evening, alone in her apartment, she performed a small ritual. From the back of her closet, she retrieved the bottle of ruby red nail polish, the same one that had set this journey in motion a year earlier. With steady hands, she applied the polish, the rich color bringing a smile to her face. No need to remove it hastily anymore. No need to hide. Tomorrow was her day off, and she could wear whatever polish she chose. As the final coat dried, Julia thought back to that terrifying moment in formation, when the morning light had caught her painted nails during the salute. What had seemed like the end had actually been a beginning. Her phone buzzed with a text from Staff Sergeant Miller. "You did good today, Hendricks. The hard part isn't over, but you've proven you're up to the challenge." Julia smiled, looking down at her ruby nails, then back to the phone. "Couldn't have done it without you," she typed back. "Thank you for seeing me before I could see myself." Setting the phone down, she walked to the window, looking out at the night sky. Stars punctuated the darkness, reminding her of how vast the universe was, and how significant even small acts of courage could be within it. Her reflection in the window glass showed a woman in a simple white t-shirt and gray lounge pants, brown hair framing a face that looked increasingly at peace. Not because the journey was over, it was far from that, but because every step now was in the right direction. The following years brought both challenges and triumphs. Julia's military career continued to advance, her performance evaluations noting her attention to detail, leadership abilities, and resilience under pressure, qualities that had always been present but now flourished as she served authentically. The ruby nail polish remained a personal tradition, reserved for days off, a reminder of both vulnerability and strength, of accidents that become turning points, of risks that yield rewards. 3 years after her transition, Julia found herself in a position to mentor others, to be for them what Staff Sergeant Miller had been for her. The military, reflecting broader societal changes, had continued to evolve in its policies and support systems. Not perfect, not without resistance, but moving steadily toward greater inclusion. On the anniversary of her official documentation change, Julia received a small package from Miller, who had since been promoted to Sergeant First Class. Inside was a framed photograph, Julia on her first official day as herself, standing tall in uniform, a tentative but genuine smile on her face. The accompanying note read simply, "Remember where you started. Be proud of how far you've come. Keep marching forward." Julia placed the photograph beside her bed, a daily reminder that courage comes in many forms, that strength includes vulnerability, that authenticity demands both honesty and persistence. That weekend, as she had done so many times before, Julia sat cross-legged on her bathroom floor. The bottle of ruby polish was nearly empty now, used sparingly, saved for special occasions. As she carefully applied the color to her nails, she reflected on the long, complex journey from that first secret application to the woman she now was, integrated, whole, known. The rich crimson dried as a gentle spring breeze drifted through the open window, carrying with it the promise of new beginnings and continued growth. Outside, the world moved at its own pace, with its own challenges and triumphs, its own stories of transformation. And Julia, with her shimmering ruby nails catching the light, was ready to meet it, head high, heart open, finally and completely herself. 5 years into her military career as Julia, she found herself deployed overseas, leading a small communications team in a support role. The deployment tested her in ways she hadn't anticipated, not just as a soldier, but as a transgender woman navigating international settings where attitudes toward gender identity varied widely. Her team, having served with her for over a year, treated her position with the same matter-of-fact acceptance they'd come to show back at home base. But interactions with allied forces and local populations required additional layers of awareness and diplomacy.
Your situation is unusual in our military,
a liaison officer from a partner force commented during a joint briefing, his tone hovering somewhere between curiosity and discomfort. My qualifications aren't, Julia replied evenly, redirecting the conversation to the task at hand. She'd become adept at such moments, acknowledging without engaging, redirecting without dismissing. The deployment brought unexpected connections as well. During a rare video call home, Julia noticed a familiar shimmer on her mother's nails.
Is that ruby polish?
She asked, surprised. Her relationship with her parents had been strained throughout her transition. Not hostile, but marked by awkward silences and careful conversational detours. Her mother looked down at her hands, almost embarrassed.
I thought...
Well, I wanted something to remind me of you while you're away. The salesgirl said this color was called Ruby Courage. Seemed fitting. The simple gesture bridged a gap years of careful conversations hadn't managed to cross. That night, despite the physical distance, Julia felt closer to home than she had in years. The deployment ended with a commendation for her team's work, establishing critical communication networks under challenging conditions. The citation made no mention of her gender identity. Exactly as it should be, Julia thought. Her service stood on its own merits. Returning stateside, Julia found herself assigned to a training role, working with new recruits. The position came with both opportunity and apprehension. Visibility meant vulnerability, but also the chance to demonstrate by example that diversity strengthened the military rather than weakened it. Is it true you used to be a man? A fresh-faced recruit asked during an orientation session, the question blurted out with the heedless curiosity of youth. The room fell silent, other recruits shifting uncomfortably, uncertain how such a blatant personal question would be received. Julia looked at the young soldier, seeing not insubordination, but genuine curiosity, perhaps even a reaching for understanding. I was assigned male at birth, she answered calmly, but I've always been who I am. The difference is that now my exterior matches my interior. She paused, then added, Any other questions relevant to your training? The recruit flushed, but shook his head, and the session continued. Later, Julia noticed the same young soldier defending her to others, explaining in halting but earnest terms that Sergeant Hendricks is just Sergeant Hendricks, okay? It's not complicated. Small victories, Julia had learned, often meant more than grand ones. 7 years into her journey as Julia, a letter arrived from Sergeant First Class Miller, who had retired from active duty and taken a position with a veteran support organization. They're looking for speakers who can address the experiences of transgender service members, Miller wrote. Your name came up. Interest optional, courage required. Julia traced her fingers over the words. Public speaking had never been her strength, and sharing her personal journey with strangers held little appeal. But the thought of others facing the same fears alone, without the guidance she'd been fortunate enough to receive, tipped the balance. Her first presentation was to a small group of military medical personnel, doctors, nurses, and therapists seeking to better understand the needs of transgender service members. Julia spoke plainly about her experiences, the challenges of transitioning while in uniform, the importance of knowledgeable and respectful care. The medical aspects matter, she told them, but so does being seen as a whole person, not just a collection of symptoms or a checklist of procedures. The questions afterward were thoughtful, specific, focused on improving care rather than satisfying curiosity. Julia left feeling she'd made a tangible difference, perhaps small in scale, but meaningful in impact. More speaking engagements followed, each one expanding her comfort zone a little further. She spoke to military leadership about policy implementation, to service members about creating inclusive unit cultures, to veterans groups about continuity of care after discharge. In each setting, Julia brought not just her story but her complete self, the soldier, the woman, the individual whose experiences represented one path among many, whose voice was both personal and part of a larger chorus seeking recognition and respect. 10 years to the day after that fateful inspection where Staff Sergeant Miller had discovered her painted nails, Julia found herself back at the same base, now as a guest speaker for a command leadership seminar. The parade ground where she had once stood at attention, terrified of discovery, now served as the backdrop for a photograph commemorating her participation in the event. As the photographer adjusted the lighting, Julia glanced down at her hands, nails trimmed short in accordance with her current operational duties, but neat and well-maintained, a clear expression of her femininity within military standards. "How about a smile, Major Hendricks?" the photographer requested. Her promotion to major had come through 6 months earlier, an achievement that reflected both her individual capabilities and the institutional changes that had made her continued service possible. Julia smiled, thinking of how far she'd come from the frightened private hiding painted nails to the confident officer she now was. Her smile deepened as she spotted a familiar figure approaching, retired Sergeant First Class Miller, gray now threading through her hair, but standing as straight and proud as ever. "Congratulations, Major," Miller said, extending her hand. "You've done the uniform proud." "And you," Julia replied, clasping the offered hand warmly. "None of this would have happened without you." Miller shook her head. "You did the hard work. I just opened a door." "Sometimes that's the most important part," Julia said. "Opening doors." After the seminar concluded, the two women walked the perimeter of the base, retracing steps from a decade earlier. So much had changed: policies, personnel, even the physical structures of some buildings. Yet the essential character of military life remained consistent: service, discipline, community. "Do you still have it?" Miller asked as they completed their circuit. "The Polish that started it all?" Julia laughed. "The original bottle is long gone, but I still wear that color sometimes. A different brand now, but the same ruby red." "Some traditions are worth keeping," Miller nodded approvingly. That evening, alone in her hotel room, Julia opened her travel kit and removed a small bottle of polish. The formulation had changed over the years, the brand switching as better options became available, but the color remained the same: a rich, shimmering ruby that caught the light and held it. With practiced strokes, she applied the polish, a private ritual of remembrance and celebration. Each coat represented a year of her journey: the hardships and triumphs, the setbacks and advances, the gradual process of becoming fully herself. As the final coat dried, her phone chimed with an incoming message. A notification from the military personnel system. Her updated official photograph, incorporating her recent promotion, had been processed and uploaded to her service record. Julia opened the image, studying the woman in the crisp uniform, decorations displayed according to regulation, brown hair arranged in a neat, professional style that softened her features while maintaining military standards. The photograph showed a confident officer, her expression serious, but with a hint of warmth in the eyes. This was who she had always been, Julia realized. Not just since that day of revelation with Miller, not just since beginning hormone therapy or updating documentation, but always. The journey hadn't created her. It had revealed her. She closed the image and turned off her phone, sitting quietly in the hotel room as night settled over the base where her authentic life in uniform had begun. Through the window, she could see lights illuminating the parade ground, the flag silhouetted against the evening sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, the ongoing work of serving both country and self with integrity and purpose. But tonight was for reflection, for acknowledging the distance traveled and the path still ahead. Julia looked down at her ruby nails, now dry and gleaming in the soft light. From secret shame to open celebration, from hiding to visibility, from fear to confidence, the journey continued, each day adding new dimensions to the woman she was becoming. And as she had learned, first from Miller, then from her own experience, becoming was never finished, never complete. It was a process, ongoing and evolutionary, filled with moments both ordinary and extraordinary. The ruby nails would be removed before returning to duty tomorrow, replaced by the clear polish permitted under regulations. But Julia knew she would return to this color again and again throughout her life, a personal touchstone, a reminder of courage found in vulnerability, of strength discovered in authenticity. Some traditions, indeed, were worth keeping.
Thanks for watching, my girlies! Be sure to check out Patreon for more!